Vivian Cross didn't build an empire by ignoring details. So when her hand brushed the crooked tie of a nobody admin in her corner office, straightening it with the precision of someone who controlled boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, she noticed everything. The tremor in his fingers, the way he held his breath like a man drowning on dry land, the cheap fabric that didn't belong in her world. "Why are you breathing like that?" she asked, voice low and genuinely curious. Miles Carter fled before he could answer. By morning, the security screenshot had traveled faster than stock prices, and the invisible single father became the most dangerous rumor Hartwell Group had ever seen. If you want to see how a tie adjustment destroys two lives before rebuilding them into something real, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story reaches across the world. The 14th floor of Hartwell Group smelled like ambition, leather chairs, imported coffee, and the particular tension that lived in spaces where million-dollar decisions happened between elevator rides. Vivian Cross moved through it like weather, inevitable and precise, her heels announcing authority 3 seconds before she entered any room. She'd built this. Clawed it from family doubt and bored skepticism until the name Cross meant something beyond inherited wealth. It meant results. Which was why, at 7:43 on a Tuesday that started like every other, she noticed the man in her office who absolutely should not have been there. Miles Carter stood near her desk with a manila folder clutched like a shield, his entire body radiating the specific panic of someone who'd taken a wrong turn in a building designed to intimidate. His suit was off the rack, pressed but not tailored, and his tie, God, his tie hung slightly crooked, the knot amateur and anxious. Vivian's assistant had stepped away. Security protocols had clearly failed, and this man, whoever he was, looked like he might actually pass out on her imported rug. "You're in the wrong office," she said not unkindly. She'd learned early that power didn't require cruelty, just clarity. Miles flinched. Yes. I know, I'm sorry. Caroline said to leave the quarterly admin reports on your desk, but she's at the printer, and I didn't think anyone would be here this early." His voice carried the particular cadence of someone used to being invisible. Vivian recognized it immediately. She'd spent her first 5 years at Hartwell being underestimated by men who thought her last name was the only thing that mattered. Caroline's assistant? Temp replacement. Miles Carter from... He gestured vaguely toward the door as if his department was too insignificant to name. "I'll just leave this and go." But Vivian was already moving forward, her instincts catching on something she couldn't quite name. The tie. It was bothering her in a way that had nothing to do with aesthetics and everything to do with the fact that details mattered, that small things left undone had a way of unraveling into catastrophes. She stopped directly in front of him. Miles went completely still. "Hold still," Vivian said quietly, reaching for his tie. His breath caught, audibly, unmistakably, and she felt the exact moment his entire nervous system went into overdrive. Her fingers worked quickly, loosening the knot, straightening the fabric, rebuilding it with the muscle memory of someone who'd fixed her father's tie every morning for 3 years before he'd trusted her with actual business. This close, she could see details the distance had hidden. The faint scar near his left eyebrow, the way his jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump, the fact that his eyes, dark brown, slightly too wide, were fixed somewhere over her shoulder, like looking directly at her, might turn him to stone. "Why are you breathing like that?" she asked, genuinely curious now, her hands finishing the knot with a gentle tug. Miles jerked backward like she'd burned him. I'm sorry. Thank you. I have to..." He was gone before she could respond, the folder abandoned on her desk, his footsteps rapid and uneven down the hallway. Vivian stood alone in her office, staring at the empty doorway, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. Interesting. She'd already forgotten him by the time she sat down, but the building hadn't. Security cameras at Hartwell Group recorded everything, insurance against corporate espionage, they said, though everyone knew it was really about controlling the narrative. The camera positioned above Vivian's office door had a perfect angle. Vivian Cross, CEO and untouchable force of nature, standing inches from an unknown man in a cheap suit, her hands on his tie. His face frozen in something that looked an awful lot like intimate panic. By 8:15, the screenshot had reached the group chat of third-floor admins who had nothing better to do than speculate. By 9, it had jumped to marketing, where someone with too much creativity and not enough supervision added a caption: "When the CEO fixes more than your tie." By 10:30, it was on every phone in the building. Miles Carter didn't know any of this yet. He was 3 floors down in a windowless office that smelled like old carpet and fluorescent desperation, trying to pretend his hands weren't still shaking. "You okay, man?" Eric from accounting leaned around his cubicle divider, eyebrows raised. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Fine," Miles said automatically, the word as reflexive as breathing. "Just ran into someone in the elevator, startled me." Wasn't technically a lie. The elevator had been involved, eventually. Eric shrugged and disappeared back into spreadsheet land, leaving Miles alone with the memory of Vivian Cross's hands on his tie and the absolutely certainty that he'd just committed some kind of career-ending protocol violation. You didn't accidentally end up in the CEO's office. You didn't let the CEO touch you. You definitely didn't flee like a criminal while she was asking you a direct question. His phone buzzed. Text from Eli's school. Parent-teacher conference reminder. Thursday, 3 p.m. Miles exhaled slowly, letting the reminder ground him. This, Eli, school, the careful architecture of their life, this was what mattered. Not some bizarre encounter with a woman who lived in a completely different atmosphere than he did. He had $47 in checking until Friday. Rent was due in 9 days. Eli needed new sneakers because 8-year-olds apparently grew through shoes like water. The Hartwell Group job paid decently for admin work, had okay benefits, and most importantly had completely predictable hours that let him be home when Eli got off the school bus. Miles had learned a long time ago that survival required focus. You didn't daydream, you didn't take risks, you definitely didn't draw attention from people powerful enough to end you with a signature. By lunch, he'd almost convinced himself the morning had been irrelevant. Then he walked into the break room. The conversation died the second he appeared. 6 people, frozen mid-sentence, all staring at him with expressions ranging from amusement to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "What?" Miles asked, instantly on guard. Janice from HR, 50, kind, the type who brought cookies to birthday celebrations, held up her phone. "Honey, you might want to see this." The screenshot looked worse than the reality had felt. The angle made it look like Vivian was leaning in, intimate and intentional. Made it look like Miles was holding his breath because of desire instead of pure panic. Made it look like something it absolutely wasn't. The caption was worse. CEO's new secret? Mystery man spotted in private moment with Vivian Cross. "I was delivering reports," Miles said, his voice flat. "Her assistant was at the printer. My tie was crooked. She fixed it. That's all." "Sure, honey." Janice's smile was sympathetic but disbelieving. "That's probably exactly what happened." "It is what happened. Doesn't matter what actually happened," Eric said from the doorway, not unkindly. "Matters what it looks like. And that," he gestured at the phone, "that looks like something." Miles felt the walls closing in with familiar, suffocating pressure. This was how things unraveled. This was how you lost the fragile stability you'd spent years building. One stupid moment, one misunderstanding, one piece of gossip that took on a life of its own. "I need to fix this," he said quietly. "Fix what?" Eric looked genuinely confused. "Man, half the building is jealous. The other half is taking bets on how long before you get promoted to her personal staff." "I don't want to be promoted. I want to be invisible." But invisibility, Miles was learning, was not something you could choose once other people had decided to see you. Vivian learned about the photo during her 2 o'clock with the marketing VP, when Gerald Chen pulled up the internal company chat on the conference room screen instead of the quarterly projections. "We have a situation," he said carefully. Vivian studied the image for exactly 3 seconds. "That's Miles Carter. Admin replacement. I fixed his tie this morning." "That's the story?" "That's what happened." Gerald nodded slowly. "The internet thinks it's something else." "The internet," Vivian said dryly, "thinks a lot of things. Last month they were convinced I was secretly married to the Australian ambassador because we shook hands at a summit. This one's internal. It's spreading faster." Vivian pulled out her phone, scrolling through message requests she typically ignored. 43 new messages. She opened one at random. Is it true about you and the guy from admin? He's cute. She closed it, opened another. Didn't know you liked charity cases, Viv. And another, your dad's going to lose his mind when he sees this. That one made her pause. Richard Cross had very specific ideas about appropriate behavior for the family name, very specific ideas about image, reputation, and the kind of relationships that served strategic purposes versus the kind that looked like scandals. Tell communications to kill it, she said. Standard protocol. No comment, no acknowledgement, it dies by tomorrow. Already tried. Gerald looked uncomfortable. It's not going away. Someone leaked it to one of those corporate gossip blogs. We're getting calls from business reporters asking for comment on your relationship status. Vivian's jaw tightened. My relationship status is none of their business. Agreed, but your father called my office 20 minutes ago asking why his daughter is the subject of romance rumors with some random employee instead of focusing on the Westfield merger. There it was. The real problem wasn't the photo. It was the fact that Richard Cross saw it as a distraction from what he considered her actual job, being the perfect, polished, strategically useful version of herself that made shareholders happy and board members compliant. Set up a meeting with Carter, Vivian said. Today if possible. I'll handle it. You sure that's wise? Might add fuel to, Gerald! Her voice went cool and precise. I'm not asking for advice. Set up the meeting. He nodded and left. Vivian sat alone in the conference room, staring at the photo. The version of herself in that screenshot looked different than the woman she saw in mirrors, softer somehow, caught in a moment of unguarded focus. And Miles Carter looked exactly like what he was, someone terrified of being seen. She wondered briefly what his story was, then dismissed the thought as irrelevant sentiment. This was a problem to be managed. Nothing more. Miles got the meeting request at 3:47. Ms. Cross requests your presence in her office at 5 p.m. Caroline White, executive assistant. He read it 4 times, searching for hidden meaning in the formal phrasing. Eric whistled low when Miles showed him. You're either getting promoted or fired. No in between with that kind of summons. I vote fired, Miles muttered, already calculating how long his savings would last, how fast he could find new work, whether he could keep Eli's routine stable through another job loss. Could be worse, Eric offered. Could be asking you up there tomorrow after you've spent all night panicking. Miles didn't mention that he'd be spending all night panicking anyway. That was just standard operational procedure for his life. At 4:30, he left early to pick up Eli from the after-school program, a luxury he couldn't quite afford but absolutely couldn't do without. His son exploded out of the community center doors like he'd been launched, backpack flying, gap-toothed grin bright enough to hurt. Dad! We made volcanoes today. Mine erupted the biggest. Mrs. Rodriguez said it was scientifically impressive. Eli demonstrated with elaborate hand gestures, complete with explosion sound effects. Miles caught him mid-launch, swinging him around once before setting him down. Scientifically impressive, huh? That's because you're scientifically brilliant. Obviously. Eli grabbed his hand, chattering nonstop about baking soda and vinegar ratios as they walked to the bus stop. This, the weight of Eli's hand in his, the endless enthusiastic monologue about third-grade science, the way his son looked at him like he was the most important person in the universe. This was the entire point of everything. Every cheap meal, every double shift, every careful choice that prioritized stability over anything resembling dreams. Miles had been 19 when Eli's mother left. 20 when she signed away custody with the same casual indifference she'd shown their entire relationship. He'd been terrified and completely unprepared, working 2 jobs and taking night classes and learning that fatherhood wasn't something you practiced. It was something you survived until you figured out how to do it right. 8 years later, he still didn't know if he was doing it right. But Eli was happy, healthy, doing well in school, and seemed blissfully unaware that they were one emergency away from financial catastrophe. That was success enough. Can we have pizza tonight? Eli asked as they climbed onto the bus. We had pizza on Sunday. But that was days ago. Eli's logic was flawless in the way only 8-year-olds managed. How about pasta instead? The kind you like with the butter and cheese, Deal. But I get to pick the movie on deal. They rode in comfortable silence for 3 stops, Eli swinging his legs and humming something that might have been the theme song from whatever show he was currently obsessed with. Miles stared out the window, trying not to think about the meeting in 45 minutes, trying not to catastrophize about all the ways his life could unravel before bedtime. "You okay, Dad?" Eli's voice was suddenly quiet, observant in the way that always caught Miles off guard. "Yeah, buddy, just thinking about work stuff." "Boring work stuff or bad work stuff?" Miles looked at his son, too perceptive, too aware, carrying anxieties no 8-year-old should have to notice. "Boring work stuff. Nothing to worry about." Eli studied him with serious eyes, then nodded and went back to humming. Miles made it home with 20 minutes to spare. Got Eli settled with homework and a snack, called Mrs. Chen next door, 68, retired, absolutely refused payment, but accepted baked goods as trade, and explained he had a last-minute work thing. Go, she said, already heading over. "Eli and I have a standing chess match to finish anyway." By the time Miles got back on the bus heading downtown, his shirt was sticking to his back despite the October chill, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The Hartwell building looked different at night. Fewer people, more shadows, the kind of emptiness that made every sound echo. Miles signed in with security, got a visitor badge that felt like a scarlet letter, and took the elevator to 14 with his heart trying to beat straight through his ribs. Caroline White was still at her desk, looking as polished at 5 o'clock as she probably had at 8. "Mr. Carter, go ahead in. She's expecting you." Miles knocked once, heard "come in," and stepped into Vivian Cross's office for the second time in 12 hours. She stood by the window, silhouetted against the city lights, still wearing the same immaculate suit from that morning. When she turned, her expression was unreadable. Not cold, not warm, just absolutely neutral. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Miles sat, tried to remember how to breathe normally. Vivian didn't sit. She stayed standing, arms crossed, studying him with the same focused intensity she'd had that morning. "I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Carter, because I don't have time for elaborate explanations. Are you aware of what happened today?" "The photo," Miles said. "Yes." "And the speculation that followed?" "Yes." "What's your situation?" The question was sudden, sharp. "Personal situation." "Are you married? In a relationship?" "What? No, Miles stopped, confused about where this was going. "I'm not in a relationship." "Children?" His spine went rigid with instinctive protectiveness. "I have a son. He's 8. Why does that matter?" Something flickered in Vivian's expression. Approval, maybe, at the defensive edge in his voice. "It matters because I'm about to make you an offer, and I need to know what your priorities are." "My priority is my son." "Good. That's what I thought." She moved to her desk, pulled out a folder, and set it between them. "The photo isn't going away. My father has decided it's a problem that needs to be managed. My board is concerned about image stability heading into a major merger. And you, Mr. Carter, are now the center of a rumor that's threatening to become a distraction." Miles felt cold dread settling in his stomach. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for—" "I'm not blaming you." Her voice was firm. "I'm stating facts. Here's another fact. I need this merger to go through. It's worth $300 million in 6 months of negotiation. I am not going to let it fail because of gossip." "I can transfer," Miles said quickly. "I can request a different location, put in my notice if that's better. I don't want you to quit." Vivian sat down, finally, steepling her fingers on the desk. "I want you to be my boyfriend." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Miles stared at her. "What?" "Contract boyfriend," Vivian clarified, as if that made it less insane. 6 months, public appearances, company events, enough visibility to make the relationship believable. You'll be compensated appropriately for your time and the disruption to your life. "You can't be serious." "I'm extraordinarily serious. My family wants me to settle down. The board wants stability. This rumor, whether we like it or not, has created an opportunity to give them both." "You want to fake a relationship?" Miles said it slowly, trying to make the words make sense. "I want to establish a public relationship that serves both our interests. You need money. I saw your employee file, Mr. Carter. You're barely scraping by. I need the appearance of personal stability. This solves both problems. You looked at my file. I look at everything. No apology in her voice. You're 27, single parent, no degree, working admin despite having skills that suggest you're significantly overqualified. You're also exactly the kind of person no one would believe I'd notice, which makes the story more compelling. Miles felt anger cutting through the shock. I'm not a story. I'm a person. I know that. For the first time, Vivian's voice softened slightly, which is why I'm offering you a choice instead of just making your life difficult until you disappear. 6 months, Mr. Carter. I'll pay you enough to stabilize your situation, set up a trust for your son's education, and ensure you have actual opportunities when this is over. How much? She named a number. Miles stopped breathing. It was more money than he'd make in 3 years. Enough to wipe out debt, build savings, get Eli into better schools. Enough to stop living one emergency away from catastrophe. Enough to sell out completely. I need to think about it, he managed. You have 24 hours. Vivian slid a business card across the desk. That's my personal number. Call me tomorrow by 6 with your answer. Miles took the card with numb fingers, stood on legs that didn't feel entirely stable, and made it to the elevator before the full weight of what had just happened hit him. Vivian Cross wanted to buy him, wanted to turn him into some kind of prop in whatever game powerful people played. And the worst part, the absolutely unforgivable part, was that he was actually considering it. Because fatherhood didn't leave room for pride, only survival. And survival, apparently, had a price tag. Miles made it home at 6:43, thanked Mrs. Chen, and found Eli asleep on the couch with a book about space explorers open on his chest. He looked so small like that, still young enough to believe his dad had all the answers, still innocent enough to trust that everything would work out. Miles carefully moved the book, pulled a blanket over his son, and sat on the floor beside the couch, with his head in his hands. The business card was still in his pocket, sharp-edged and impossible to ignore. He could say no. Walk away, let the rumor die, go back to being invisible. Keep living paycheck to paycheck. Keep worrying about every unexpected expense. Keep pretending that stable enough was the same as secure. Or he could say yes. Could take the money, play the part, give Eli the kind of future Miles had never imagined being able to provide. All he had to do was lie, pretend, become someone else for 6 months while Vivian Cross used him to solve whatever problem rich people considered unsolvable. Eli shifted in his sleep, mumbling something about rocket ships. Miles pulled out his phone, stared at the number on the card, and knew, with absolute certainty, that he was going to call. Because being a father meant doing things that made you hate yourself, as long as they kept your kids safe. Even if safe came with a price tag and a contract. Even if it meant becoming exactly the kind of person he'd promised himself he'd never be. The city lights glowed through the apartment window, indifferent and eternal. Miles stayed on the floor beside his sleeping son and tried to convince himself that this wasn't the beginning of the end of everything. He failed. But he'd call anyway. Because that's what love looked like when you were desperate enough. Compromise wrapped in good intentions, sold to the highest bidder. The call came at 5:30 the next evening, just as Vivian was finishing a conference call with Tokyo that had stretched 2 hours longer than scheduled. Her private line lit up with an unknown number, and she knew immediately who it was. Ms. Cross. Miles Carter's voice was tight, controlled in a way that suggested he'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times. I'll do it. The contract. 6 months. Vivian felt a small surge of satisfaction. She'd been 70% certain he'd call, had already started contingency planning for the 30% chance he wouldn't. Good. We'll need to move quickly. Can you meet tomorrow morning? 7. My office. I work at 7. Not anymore. I'm having you transferred to executive support, reporting directly to Caroline. Same pay grade for now, better hours, and it gives us a legitimate reason for proximity. There was a pause. You already arranged the transfer? I arranged the possibility. Your answer made it official. She didn't apologize for the presumption. In her experience, apologies were for mistakes, and this had been strategic planning. My son can't know, Miles said suddenly. About the contract, the arrangement. He can't think this is fake. Something in his voice made Vivian pause, made her remember the way he'd gone rigid when she'd asked about children, the protective edge that had cut through his panic. Understood. As far as anyone knows, including your son, this is real. When do I tell him? Not yet. We need to establish the relationship publicly first, let it build naturally. In a few weeks, once it's believable, you can introduce the idea that you're seeing someone. He's 8. He's going to have questions. Then we'll prepare answers. Vivian pulled up her calendar, already blocking time. Tomorrow morning. Don't be late, Mr. Carter. Miles, he said quietly. If we're doing this, you should probably call me Miles. Tomorrow, Miles. She ended the call before the intimacy of first names could settle into something uncomfortable. Outside her window, the city was transitioning from day to night, office lights creating constellations in the urban dark. Vivian had built her entire career on calculated risks, on seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles. This arrangement with Miles Carter was simply another strategic move, another problem solved through intelligence and resources. So why did it feel different? She dismissed the thought and returned to work. Miles arrived at 6:50 the next morning, wearing the same cheap suit from 2 days ago, but with a tie that was perfectly straight. He'd practiced the knot 17 times the night before, watching YouTube tutorials until his fingers could manage it without thinking. The building felt different at this hour, quieter, but more intense, filled with people who arrived early because ambition didn't sleep in. Caroline White met him outside Vivian's office with a tablet and an expression that suggested she knew exactly what was happening and found it moderately entertaining. Mr. Carter, coffee? I'm fine, thank you. You're not fine, you're terrified, but we'll pretend otherwise for professional courtesy. She smiled, not unkindly. Ms. Cross is running 3 minutes behind. Have a seat. Miles sat, trying not to look like he was about to bolt. The executive floor smelled like expensive everything. Coffee, leather, the particular scent of money so old it had stopped trying to prove anything. He didn't belong here, would never belong here, contract or not. Relax, Caroline said, not looking up from her tablet. She doesn't bite, usually. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. She glanced at him, shrewd and assessing. You know what you're getting into? No, Miles admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. Good answer. Honesty will serve you better than confidence in this situation. The office door opened and Caroline straightened. She's ready for you. Vivian stood behind her desk, already immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Miles's monthly rent. She gestured to the conference table by the window. Sit. We have a lot to cover and limited time. Miles sat. Vivian pulled out a folder thick enough to be intimidating and slid it across the table. Standard NDA, employment transfer paperwork, and the contract itself. Read everything. Initial each page, sign the last. My lawyer has already reviewed it. You're welcome to have your own attorney look it over, but this is non-negotiable on the major points. Miles opened the folder with hands that wanted to shake. The first document was indeed an NDA, dense with legal language about confidentiality and consequences. The second was his transfer paperwork, executive support, reporting to Caroline White, $45,000 a year instead of $32,000. The third was the contract itself. 6 months, as promised. Public appearances at company functions, social events, and such additional occasions as may be reasonably required to maintain the appearance of a genuine romantic relationship. Compensation, $150,000, paid in monthly installments. An additional $50,000 placed in an educational trust for Eli Carter, accessible for tuition and qualified expenses. $200,000, Miles said, his voice barely above a whisper. The educational trust was my addition, Vivian said. You mentioned your son. I assumed his future would be meaningful leverage. It's not leverage, it's... Miles stopped, swallowed hard. It's everything. Then we have aligned interests. She pulled out a pen, set it beside the contract. There are additional clauses. Confidentiality survives the contract term. If you violate the NDA, you forfeit the compensation and owe damages. If either party wishes to terminate early, there's a 30-day notice requirement unless cause exists for immediate termination. What constitutes cause? Illegal activity, gross misconduct, actions that materially damage either party's reputation beyond the scope of the arrangement. Vivian's tone was clinical, businesslike. There's also a morality clause. No other romantic relationships during the contract term. No behavior that would undermine the believability of our relationship. Miles looked up sharply. You're restricting my personal life? I'm restricting both our personal lives. The clause applies equally to me. She met his eyes without flinching. 6 months, Miles. Surely you can manage exclusivity for 6 months when the alternative is poverty. The words were harsh but not cruel, just honest in a way that cut deeper than meanness. Miles returned to the contract, reading clauses about public behavior, social media restrictions, protocols for handling press inquiries. There was even a section about appropriate displays of affection in public settings. You wrote a contract about how we're supposed to touch each other? I wrote a contract that protects both of us from ambiguity. Would you prefer to improvise intimate moments in public without any discussion of boundaries? Put that way, it almost made sense. Almost. Miles reached the signature page. His hand hovered over the paper, pen suddenly heavy as gravity. This is insane, he said quietly. Yes, Vivian agreed. But it's also effective. Sign the contract, Miles, or walk away. I won't judge you either way. He believed her. That was the strangest part. Vivian Cross might be manipulative, calculating, willing to buy solutions to her problems, but she wasn't lying. She would let him leave if he chose to, would probably have another plan in place by lunch. Miles thought about Eli, asleep on the couch with dreams of rocket ships. Thought about student loans and medical bills and the particular anxiety of checking your bank balance before buying groceries. Thought about what it meant to be a good father when the world made goodness a luxury you couldn't afford. He signed. Vivian countersigned immediately, her signature swift and certain. Welcome to the arrangement, Miles. We start tonight. Tonight? Hartwell Group Annual Gala, 7 o'clock, Grand Ballroom at the Meridian. I'll have a suit delivered to your apartment by 3. Give Caroline your address and sizes. Car service will pick you up at 6:30. Miles felt panic rising. I can't tonight. Eli gets home at 4. I need to make dinner, help with homework. Do you have someone who can stay with him? My neighbor, but I can't just pay her. Vivian's tone was matter-of-fact. You now have the resources to pay for childcare. Use them. This is part of the arrangement, Miles. I need you presentable and available. He's going to ask where I'm going. Tell him work event. It's not even a lie. She stood, signaling the meeting's end. Caroline will brief you on basic etiquette, who to avoid, who to engage. Arrive ready to be seen. Miles stood on shaky legs, the signed contract suddenly feeling less like salvation and more like a prison sentence he'd volunteered for. Ms. Cross, Vivian, she interrupted. In private, it's Vivian. We should probably get comfortable with first names before we're expected to look comfortable in public. Vivian. The name felt strange in his mouth, too intimate for someone who'd just purchased 6 months of his life. What if I'm terrible at this? What if no one believes it? For the first time since he'd entered the office, Vivian's expression softened into something almost like sympathy. Then we'll make them believe it. That's what I'm good at, Miles. Making people see what I need them to see. She said it like a comfort. It landed like a threat. The suit arrived at 2:45 in a garment bag that looked more expensive than furniture. Miles opened it in his bedroom while Eli was still at school and found perfection. Charcoal gray, obviously tailored, with a crisp white shirt and a tie in deep blue that somehow made the whole thing look effortless. There was a note pinned to the jacket. Shoes size 10. Black Oxfords. Should fit. Wear the tie. A.V. The shoes were in a separate box, leather so soft it felt criminal. Miles tried everything on and barely recognized himself in the bathroom mirror. The suit fit like it had been made for him, and probably had been, he realized, remembering that Vivian had requested his sizes. She'd anticipated his agreement, had already set things in motion before he'd even signed. Dad? Eli's voice came from the living room. You home? Miles changed quickly back into normal clothes and found his son dropping his backpack with the casual violence of 8-year-olds everywhere. Hey, buddy. How was school? Good. We started multiplication today. It's basically just adding the same number a bunch of times, which seems like a waste when you could just add, but Mrs. Rodriguez says it's faster. Eli paused, studying Miles with suspicious eyes. Why are you home early? I have a work thing tonight. Important dinner. How important? Pretty important. Mrs. Chen is going to stay with you. I'll leave money for pizza. Eli's face lit up. 2 pizza days in 1 week? Are we rich now? The question hit harder than it should have. No, buddy, just work is going well. Better opportunities. Does that mean we can get the apartment with the park nearby? Miles felt his chest tighten. Eli had been asking about moving closer to the good school district for months, had even found listings online and shown them to Miles with heartbreaking hope. Maybe. Let's see how things go. Okay. Eli accepted this with the easy faith of children who still believed their parents could fix anything. Can I have extra cheese on the pizza? You can have whatever you want. By 6:15, Miles was dressed again, standing in front of the mirror and trying to remember how to breathe. The suit made him look like someone else. Someone who belonged in places like the Meridian, who knew which fork to use and how to make small talk about stock portfolios. Mrs. Chen arrived at 6:20 with her usual efficiency. You look very handsome, Miles. Important work dinner? Something like that. Don't worry about Eli. We'll be fine. Go. Impress whoever needs impressing. The car service was exactly on time. A sleek black sedan with a driver who didn't make small talk. Miles spent the 20-minute ride trying not to sweat through the expensive shirt, trying to remember anything Caroline had told him during their brief afternoon session about gala etiquette. The Meridian was the kind of hotel that made you feel poor just looking at it. Miles followed well-dressed strangers through marble lobbies and up sweeping staircases to a ballroom that looked like something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers, elaborate floral arrangements, round tables set with more silverware than seemed necessary for a single meal. He found Vivian immediately, despite the crowd. She stood near the bar in a dress that was somehow both elegant and devastating, deep red against pale skin, talking to an older couple with the focused attention she seemed to give everything. Then she glanced toward the entrance, saw him, and smiled. It was the smile that got him. Not polite, not professional, genuinely warm, almost relieved. She said something to the couple and crossed the room with the kind of confidence that made people move aside without being asked. Miles. She touched his arm, the gesture casual and familiar. You look perfect. I look like I'm playing dress-up. You look like you belong here. She kept her hand on his arm, guiding him toward the bar. First rule, stay close to me. Second rule, let me handle conversations until you get your bearings. Third rule, if anyone asks how we met, we tell them the truth. You were delivering reports, I noticed you, things developed naturally. That's not the truth. It's close enough. She ordered wine for both of them without asking his preference. The couple I was talking to, Robert and Diane Westfield, he's the CEO we're trying to merge with. They're old money, old values, very interested in stability and traditional relationships. No pressure then. Vivian's smile was quick and genuine. You'll be fine. Just follow my lead. The Westfields approached within minutes, and Miles felt Vivian's hand slide to the small of his back, a gesture that looked protective, possessive, and completely natural. Robert, Diane, I'd like you to meet Miles Carter. Miles, this is Robert Westfield and his wife Diane. Miles shook hands, managed what he hoped was an appropriate smile. Robert Westfield had the handshake of someone who'd been testing grip strength his entire life. Carter, Robert said, studying Miles with undisguised curiosity. What do you do, young man? I work at Hartwell, executive support. How did you two meet? Diane asked, her tone friendly, but her eyes calculating in the way of women who'd spent lifetimes reading between social lines. Vivian answered before Miles could. Actually, we met through work. Miles was delivering quarterly reports. I noticed him, and she glanced at Miles with an expression that looked remarkably like affection. I couldn't stop noticing him after that. Love at first sight? Diane's smile was indulgent. Something like that, Vivian said, and the way she looked at Miles made his throat tight because it looked real, felt real, for a dangerous second. Well, Robert said heartily, always good to see you settling down, Vivian. Your father must be pleased. Something flickered in Vivian's expression. My father has opinions about everything. The conversation shifted to business, the merger, market conditions, regulatory concerns. Miles tried to follow along, nodding at appropriate moments, but mostly he focused on not looking as lost as he felt. Vivian kept her hand on his back the entire time, a steady pressure that felt more like a lifeline than a performance. When the Westfields finally moved on, Miles exhaled slowly. "You did well," Vivian murmured. "I barely said anything." "Exactly. You let me lead, stayed calm, looked appropriately interested. That's all this requires." Except it wasn't all it required, Miles discovered over the next 2 hours. It required laughing at mediocre jokes from executives whose names he couldn't remember. Required standing close enough to Vivian that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that made him dizzy. Required pretending that being touched casually by a woman this far out of his league was normal, comfortable, not terrifying. Around 9 o'clock, a man approached with the kind of smile that immediately set Miles on edge. Too confident, too knowing, like he was in on a joke no one else had heard yet. "Vivian Cross?" he said smoothly, looking radiant as always. "Gordon." Vivian's tone cooled several degrees. "I didn't realize you'd be here. Wouldn't miss the Hartwell Gala. Tradition." Gordon Wexler. Miles recognized the name from Caroline's briefing. CEO of a competing firm, notorious for hostile takeovers, turned his attention to Miles. "And you must be the mysterious boyfriend. Gordon Wexler." Miles shook his hand, felt the deliberate squeeze that lasted a second too long. "Miles Carter." "Carter," Gordon repeated, like he was tasting the name. "What do you do, Miles?" "I work at Hartwell." "In what capacity?" "Executive support." "Ah." The single syllable carried volumes of condescension. How did someone in executive support catch Vivian's eye? She's usually so selective. Vivian's hand tightened on Miles's arm. "I'm selective about competence, Gordon. Miles has both intelligence and integrity, two qualities you wouldn't recognize if they introduced themselves personally." Gordon laughed, unbothered by the insult. Still sharp as ever. "Tell me, how long have you two been together?" "A few weeks," Vivian said. "Weeks?" Gordon's smile widened. "That's quite sudden for someone as calculated as you, Vivian. Almost impulsive. Almost human, you mean?" "I didn't say that." He turned back to Miles, eyes glittering with malicious curiosity. "You know what they say about Ms. Cross, don't you? Everything is strategy. Nothing is spontaneous. Makes a man wonder what the end game is." Miles felt anger rising, sharp and protective. "The end game is that I'm with someone I care about. Does there need to be more than that?" "In my experience, always." Gordon raised his glass in mock salute. "Well, enjoy it while it lasts. Temporary arrangements usually have expiration dates." He walked away before either of them could respond. Miles waited until Gordon was out of earshot. "Friend of yours?" "Competitor. Vulture." Vivian's jaw was tight. "He's been trying to undermine me for years. Ignore him. He called this temporary. He doesn't know anything. He's fishing." But something in Vivian's voice suggested Gordon's words had landed closer to truth than she wanted to admit. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of similar interactions, people assessing, judging, clearly trying to determine whether this relationship was real or useful or both. By the time they finally left at 11, Miles felt wrung out, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. The car service took them back in silence. Vivian stared out the window, her earlier warmth replaced by something more distant, more familiar. "You did well tonight," she said finally. "I felt like a performing seal." "Welcome to my entire life." She glanced at him, expression unreadable in the passing streetlights. "It gets easier. The performance becomes natural eventually." "That's what I'm afraid of." Vivian didn't respond. The car stopped outside Miles's apartment building, significantly less impressive than the Meridian, the kind of place where the elevator broke monthly and the hallway smelled like someone else's cooking. Miles reached for the door handle, then stopped. "Vivian." "This was good," she interrupted. "The Westfields believed it. That's what matters." "Right, what matters?" Miles got out, stood on the sidewalk as the car pulled away, and tried to remember why he'd thought $200,000 was worth this. Inside, Mrs. Chen was asleep on the couch. Eli was in his bed, sprawled out like a starfish, one arm hanging off the mattress. Miles paid Mrs. Chen double what she asked for, saw her out, and then just stood in Eli's doorway, watching his son sleep. This was why. This exact reason. The peaceful face of a child who didn't know how close they lived to disaster, who still believed his father could protect him from everything. Even if protection looked like selling out, even if safety came wrapped in a contract and a red dress and a stranger's calculating smile. Miles changed out of the expensive suit, hung it carefully in his closet like evidence of a crime, and tried to sleep. He failed. But tomorrow he'd do it again, and the day after. For 6 months, until the contract ended and he could go back to being invisible. If he remembered how. The performance became routine faster than Miles expected. 3 weeks into the contract, he could navigate a corporate dinner without breaking into visible panic, could stand beside Vivian at charity auctions and museum openings, his hand resting naturally on her waist while she charmed donors and deflected rivals, could smile through invasive questions about their future and deflect speculation about wedding dates with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned that lying got easier the more you did it. What didn't get easier was going home afterward. "You're wearing fancy clothes a lot now," Eli observed one Thursday evening, watching Miles change out of yet another tailored suit. "Is work different?" "A little different," Miles said carefully. "I got moved to a new department, more client-facing stuff." "What's client-facing?" "Means I have to look nice and talk to important people." Eli considered this seriously. "Do you like it?" The question was harder to answer than it should have been. Miles liked the money, liked being able to buy groceries without calculating every item, liked paying rent 2 weeks early, liked the growing balance in his savings account that felt like a buffer against disaster. He even liked some parts of the work itself. Caroline was efficient and kind. The tasks were challenging enough to be interesting, and he discovered a knack for organization that made him genuinely useful. What he didn't like was the constant performance, the feeling of being watched and assessed, the way Vivian looked at him sometimes like he was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. "It's fine, buddy. Different, but fine." "Okay." Eli returned to his homework with the easy acceptance of children who still trusted their parents' answers. "Can we have tacos tomorrow?" "Absolutely." But tomorrow brought something different. Tomorrow brought Vivian's text at 7 in the morning. "Need to talk. Coffee before work?" They met at a cafe 3 blocks from Hartwell, the kind of place where executives grabbed expensive lattes before descending into boardrooms. Vivian was already seated when Miles arrived, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky and looking tense in a way he'd learned to recognize. "What's wrong?" he asked, sliding into the booth across from her. "My father wants to meet you." Miles felt his stomach drop. "When?" "Sunday dinner. His house in Connecticut." She pulled off the sunglasses, and Miles saw exhaustion in the shadows under her eyes. "This is moving faster than I anticipated. He's usually content to ignore my personal life as long as it doesn't interfere with business, but the Westfield merger has him paying attention." "What do I need to know?" "Everything." Vivian pulled out her phone, scrolled to notes that looked extensive. "Richard Cross is 73, built Hartwell from a regional firm into a national powerhouse, and believes in traditional values, strategic marriages, and the supremacy of family legacy. He thinks I'm reckless, emotional, and too young to be running his company despite the fact that I've increased profits by 40% in 3 years. Sounds supportive. He's complicated. Something vulnerable flickered across her face before she controlled it. He wants me to succeed, but only in ways he understands. This relationship, you, represents something he can't control, which makes him suspicious. Should I be worried? You should be prepared. Vivian leaned forward, her intensity focused entirely on him. He's going to test you, Miles. He'll ask about your background, your intentions, your financial situation. He'll try to find weaknesses, inconsistencies, reasons this isn't real. It isn't real. He can't know that. Her voice was sharp, almost desperate. If he suspects this is an arrangement, he'll use it against me, against us. The Westfield deal dies, the board questions my judgment, and your compensation becomes legally complicated. Miles understood the subtext. If this fell apart, they both lost everything. What do you need from me? Sell it. Be yourself, but confident. Don't apologize for who you are or where you come from. He respects strength, even in people he doesn't initially value. She paused. And Miles, he's going to be awful about Eli. About you being a single parent, about your age when he was born. Don't let him make you defensive. You've told him about Eli? He knows. He had you investigated the day after the gala. Vivian said it matter-of-factly, like invasion of privacy was standard procedure. He knows about your parents, your lack of degree, Eli's mother leaving. He knows everything that can be found in public records. Miles felt violation and anger warring in his chest. And you're okay with that? I'm not okay with anything my father does. I'm just realistic about his methods. She reached across the table, her hand covering his in a gesture that looked supportive but felt calculated. Sunday, 6 o'clock. I'll pick you up at 4. It's a 2-hour drive and we need time to prepare. What about Eli? Bring him. The suggestion surprised them both. Vivian withdrew her hand, looking uncomfortable. My father should meet him. It makes the relationship more credible, and it gives you an ally. 8-year-olds are excellent at deflecting tension. I'm not using my son as a prop. I'm not asking you to. I'm suggesting he come to dinner with people who matter to you. That's normal, Miles. That's what couples do. The word couple hung between them, strange and weighted. They'd been playing couple for weeks now, but always in public, always with witnesses. This felt different, more intimate, more dangerous. I'll think about it, Miles said finally. Think fast. I need to know by tomorrow. She left first, disappearing into the morning crowd with the purposeful stride of someone who'd already moved on to the next problem. Miles sat alone with cold coffee and the growing certainty that this arrangement was spinning beyond his control. That evening, he asked Eli about Sunday plans with carefully casual phrasing. How would you feel about meeting some people I work with? Dinner at a nice house, probably boring adult conversation, but there might be a pool or something. Eli looked up from his tablet, eyes bright with sudden interest. Like a party? More like a fancy dinner. Can I wear my good shirt, the blue one? You can wear whatever you want, buddy. Then yes. Eli returned to his tablet, already mentally planning his outfit with the seriousness of someone for whom social events were still adventures rather than obligations. Miles texted Vivian, He'll come. What should I tell him about you? The response came immediately. The truth. That we're seeing each other, that it's new, that you wanted him to meet someone who's important to you. Miles stared at that last line for a long time before responding. Okay. Sunday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Vivian picked them up at 4 in a car that made Eli's eyes go wide, sleek, black, the kind of vehicle that looked like it belonged in movies about spies. Whoa! Eli breathed, climbing into the back seat with reverent care. This is so cool. Vivian glanced back, and Miles saw her smile, genuine, unpracticed, the kind of expression she didn't wear in public. You must be Eli. I'm Vivian. Are you my dad's girlfriend? Direct, unfiltered, pure 8-year-old confidence. Miles felt panic rising, but Vivian handled it smoothly. I am. Is that okay with you? Eli studied her with serious consideration. Do you make him happy? The question landed hard. Vivian's eyes flicked to Miles, something complicated passing between them. I hope so, she said quietly. Does he seem happy to you? Happier than before, less worried about money stuff. Eli said it casually, unaware he was revealing more than Miles wanted exposed. So yeah, I guess you're okay. High praise, Vivian murmured, catching Miles's eye in the rearview mirror. The drive to Connecticut was surreal. Eli chattered about school, asked Vivian questions with fearless curiosity. What did she do? Why did she work so much? Did she like pizza? What was her favorite superhero? And Vivian answered with surprising patience, even humor. Miles watched them interact and felt something dangerous shifting in his chest, something that felt uncomfortably like hope. We're almost there, Vivian said as they turned onto a private road lined with ancient trees. Eli, Mr. Cross, my father, can be a bit serious. He might ask you questions about school or what you like to do. Just be yourself, okay? I'm always myself, Eli said with perfect confidence. Who else would I be? Miles caught Vivian's smile in the mirror and felt that dangerous feeling intensify. The Cross estate was exactly what Miles expected. Sprawling, old money, the kind of house that had been in families for generations and looked it. Richard Cross met them at the door himself, tall and imposing despite his age, with Vivian's sharp eyes and a mouth that suggested smiling was a strategic choice rather than a natural reflex. "Vivian," he kissed his daughter's cheek with formal affection. "You're late." "We're exactly on time, Dad." "On time is late in my book." His attention shifted to Miles, assessing and cold. "You must be Mr. Carter." Miles shook his hand, met his eyes directly. "Miles, thank you for having us, sir." "And this must be your son." Richard looked down at Eli with the expression of someone unused to children and uncertain about protocol. Eli, completely undaunted, stuck out his hand. "I'm Eli Carter. You have a really big house." Something flickered in Richard's expression. Not quite amusement, but close. "Thank you, Eli. Would you like to see the library while the adults talk?" "Do you have books about space?" "I'm sure we can find something appropriate." A housekeeper appeared to escort Eli away, and Miles felt his security blanket disappearing down a hallway filled with oil paintings and inherited wealth. Richard led them to a sitting room that looked like it had been decorated in 1920 and never updated, all dark wood and leather and the smell of old cigars. "Drink?" Richard asked, already pouring himself whiskey. "No, thank you," Miles said. "I'll have wine," Vivian said, her tone careful. Richard poured in silence, handed Vivian her glass, and then settled into a chair that was clearly his, worn in specific places, positioned for optimal authority. "So, Miles, tell me about yourself." It was a trap disguised as small talk. Miles had prepared for this, had rehearsed honest answers with Caroline, but actually sitting across from Richard Cross made every planned response feel inadequate. "I'm 27, originally from upstate New York. I work at Hartwell in executive support, reporting to Caroline White. I have an 8-year-old son, Eli, who's the best thing that ever happened to me. No college degree. No, sir. I had to work full-time when Eli was born. Couldn't manage both. His mother? Not in the picture, her choice." Richard's expression didn't change. "That must have been difficult, raising a child alone at 19. It was the best thing I ever did, even when it was the hardest." "Admirable sentiment." Richard sipped his whiskey. "What are your intentions with my daughter?" Vivian cut in before Miles could answer. "Dad, we're not in a Victorian novel. You don't need to interrogate him about intentions. I'm simply interested in understanding the nature of this relationship. It seems quite sudden." "It was sudden," Miles said, finding his footing. "I wasn't looking for anything when I met Vivian, wasn't in a place to even consider dating, but sometimes the right person shows up when you least expect it." "The right person?" Richard's tone was skeptical. "And what makes my daughter the right person for someone in your situation?" The condescension was subtle but unmistakable. Miles felt anger flare, then controlled it. "My situation? Single parent, limited education, hourly work until recently. Vivian moves in circles that require certain social fluencies, certain financial securities. How do you reconcile that gap?" "I don't." Miles met his eyes steadily. "I'm not trying to become someone else. Vivian knows who I am, where I come from. If that's not enough, she wouldn't be with me." "Wouldn't she?" Richard glanced at his daughter. Vivian has always had a tendency toward impulsive decisions, emotional choices that don't serve strategic interests. "This isn't impulsive," Vivian said, her voice tight, "and my personal life isn't a strategic interest." "Everything is strategic, Vivian. You should know that by now." Richard turned back to Miles. "What do you know about the Westfield merger?" The sudden shift caught Miles off guard. "I know it's important to Hartwell. Significant expansion opportunity. It's worth $300 million and depends heavily on Robert Westfield's perception of stability and traditional values. He's old-fashioned, believes in family units, and partnerships that serve business interests." Richard let the implication hang. "Your relationship with my daughter has become part of that narrative. Do you understand the pressure that creates?" Miles understood perfectly. He was being told, in polite language, that he was a means to an end, and that Richard Cross knew it. "I understand that people will always have opinions about other people's relationships," Miles said carefully. But Vivian and I aren't together because of business. We're together because we choose to be. Choice. Richard smiled thinly. How romantic. Tell me, Miles, what happens when the choice becomes inconvenient, when the novelty wears off and you're left with incompatibility? Then we'll deal with it like adults. But that's not where we are now. Where are you now? The question was a challenge. Miles glanced at Vivian, saw something in her expression that looked like fear wrapped in defiance. He made a choice in that moment, one that had nothing to do with contracts and everything to do with the woman beside him, who was trying not to look like she needed defending. I'm in love with your daughter, Miles said quietly. I know it's fast. I know it doesn't make sense on paper, but it's real. The room went silent. Vivian's hand found his, her fingers trembling slightly. Richard stared at them both with an expression Miles couldn't read. Well, Richard said finally, that was unexpectedly direct. Dinner was an exercise in controlled warfare. Richard asked questions disguised as polite conversation, probed for weaknesses in their story, watched every interaction between Miles and Vivian with calculating attention. Eli, oblivious to the tension, talked enthusiastically about the library he'd explored and the book about Mars colonies that Richard's housekeeper had found for him. Mr. Cross has a whole shelf about space, Eli announced. Can we get shelves like that, Dad? We'll see, buddy. That's what adults say when they mean no, Eli said wisely, making Richard's mouth twitch into something almost resembling a smile. Your son is remarkably perceptive, Richard said. He's remarkable in general, Miles agreed. After dinner, Richard requested a private word with Vivian. Miles waited in the hallway with Eli, trying not to imagine the conversation happening behind closed doors. When Vivian emerged 15 minutes later, her expression was carefully neutral, but Miles saw the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. Ready to go? She asked. The drive back was quiet. Eli fell asleep within 20 minutes, exhausted from adventure and rich food. Miles watched the darkness outside the window and tried to process everything that had happened. I'm sorry, Vivian said finally. My father was worse than I expected. What did he say? After dinner? That he's not convinced, that he thinks this is moving too fast, that he's concerned about my judgment. She paused. He also said he's impressed you stood up to him. He respects that, even if he doesn't like it. I meant what I said, Miles said quietly, about being in love with you. Vivian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Miles, I know it's not real. I know it's part of the performance. But I needed him to believe it, so I said it like I meant it. You're a better actor than I thought. Miles didn't respond, because the terrifying truth was that he wasn't sure he'd been acting at all. The weeks that followed took on a strange rhythm. More dinners, more events, more moments where the performance felt less like lying and more like prophecy. Vivian started texting him about things unrelated to the contract, articles she thought he'd find interesting, jokes that only made sense if you'd survived certain kinds of corporate meetings, questions about Eli that felt genuinely curious rather than strategically planned. They had coffee twice a week, lunch when schedules allowed, started having actual conversations instead of strategic planning sessions. Vivian asked about his life before Hartwell, before Eli, and Miles found himself telling her things he hadn't talked about in years. His parents' deaths when he was 17, the scholarship to college he'd had to abandon, the particular loneliness of being young and responsible when everyone else was young and free. Vivian told him about growing up cross, about the weight of expectations and inherited empire, about loving her father while resenting everything he represented, about wanting to prove herself and simultaneously wanting to burn down every system that required proof. Sometimes I think about just walking away, she admitted one afternoon in her office. Selling my shares, taking the money, disappearing somewhere nobody knows the name Cross. Why don't you? Because I'm good at this. Because walking away would mean my father was right about me being too weak for the responsibility. She smiled without humor. And because I'm too stubborn to let him win. That's not weakness, Miles said. That's commitment. Is there a difference? I think so. Weakness is staying because you're afraid to leave. Commitment is staying because you believe in what you're building, even when it's hard. Vivian looked at him with an expression he'd learned to recognize, surprised that he'd said something that mattered, followed by the careful control that meant she was feeling more than she wanted to admit. "When did you get so wise?" she asked lightly. Single parenting is basically a crash course in philosophy. You learn things fast when someone's counting on you. 2 months into the contract, Eli asked the question Miles had been dreading. "Do you love Vivian?" They were doing dishes, routine and domestic, Eli standing on his step stool to reach the sink. Miles kept his hands busy, kept his voice casual. "Why do you ask?" "Because you smile different when you talk about her, and you check your phone more. And last week you let me have ice cream for breakfast because you were distracted thinking about something." Miles had forgotten that 8-year-olds noticed everything. "I care about her a lot," he said carefully. "But do you love her?" "It's complicated, buddy." "That's another adult thing that means you don't want to answer." Eli handed him a plate to dry. "I like her. She's smart and she doesn't talk to me like I'm stupid. Plus, she told me that story about the board meeting where everyone was wrong and she proved it with math." "She told you about that?" "Last week when you were on that conference call, we had hot chocolate and she explained compound interest." Eli said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. "So yeah, I think you should love her. She's cool." Miles wanted to explain that love wasn't about cool, that relationships were complicated, that sometimes feelings didn't matter when circumstances were impossible. But Eli was 8 and believed in simple truths, and Miles didn't have the heart to complicate them. "I'll think about it," he said. "Okay, but don't think too long. Marcus's dad thought too long, and then his girlfriend moved away, and now Marcus's dad is sad all the time." Children's logic was devastating in its clarity. That night, Miles lay awake and tried to pinpoint exactly when the performance had stopped feeling like performance, when Vivian's smile had started mattering more than the paycheck, when the idea of the contract ending had started feeling less like freedom and more like loss. He was falling in love with her. Actually, genuinely, catastrophically falling in love with a woman who'd bought 6 months of his time and would walk away when the contract ended because that was the deal. That was what they'd both agreed to. Miles had survived a lot of hard things in 27 years. He wasn't sure he'd survive this. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in early December. Miles was at his desk when his phone lit up with a news alert. Vivian Cross, engaged to tech billionaire Marcus Chen, Hartwell-Chen Strategic Partnership announced. The world tilted sideways. Miles read the headline 3 times, then clicked through to the article. There was a photo. Vivian and Marcus Chen at some gala Miles didn't remember, both smiling, looking every inch the power couple. The article talked about strategic partnerships, market expansion, family approval. Talked about how the engagement had been quietly in the works for months, how this union represented the future of both companies. Months. While Miles had been falling in love, Vivian had been planning her next move. He barely made it to the bathroom before he threw up. Caroline found him 20 minutes later, pale and shaking in the executive suite hallway. "Miles, what's wrong?" He showed her the article. Her expression shifted through shock, confusion, and something that looked like fury. "That's not... She didn't tell you." "Apparently I'm the last to know." His voice sounded wrong, hollow. "I need to talk to her. She's in a board meeting until 4. I don't care. Get her out." Something in his tone made Caroline move. She made a call, spoke quietly, then nodded. "She'll meet you in her office in 5 minutes." Vivian was waiting when he arrived, standing by the window with the guilty posture of someone who knew exactly what was coming. "Miles, is it real?" His voice was flat, controlled. "The engagement, is it real?" "It's strategic. Marcus Chen and I have been discussing a partnership for months, and our families thought—" "I didn't ask what your families thought. I asked if it's real." Vivian closed her eyes. "It's business, Miles. It's always been business." "Right, business." He laughed, the sound bitter. "I'm business. This, us, all business. You knew that. From the beginning, you knew. I knew 6 months. I knew a contract. I didn't know you were planning your actual future with someone else while I was pretending to be your fake boyfriend." He wanted to yell, wanted to rage, but the anger came out quiet and devastating instead. "When were you going to tell me?" "I'm telling you now." "The news told me. You were just going to let me find out from a press release?" "I didn't know how to..." Vivian stopped, frustration clear in every line of her body. This doesn't change our arrangement. We still have 4 months on the contract. Miles stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time how completely different their realities were. To him, this had become real, messy and complicated and terrifyingly genuine. To her, it was still a contract, still a means to an end, still something that could be managed with the right strategy. "Keep the money," he said quietly. "All of it. I'm done." "Miles, don't be what? Hurt? Angry? Human?" He moved toward the door. "I'll submit my transfer request today. Somewhere far from here. Somewhere I don't have to see you or read about your strategic marriage or pretend any of this mattered." "It mattered." Her voice cracked slightly. "Miles, it mattered." "Not enough." He opened the door, paused. "Good luck with your merger, Ms. Cross. I hope it's everything you sacrificed for." He walked out before she could respond, before the control broke and she saw exactly how much damage she'd done. Miles made it home, told a confused Eli they were moving, and spent the night systematically applying for transfer positions in cities far enough away that he'd never have to accidentally see Vivian Cross again. By morning, he had 3 offers. He accepted the one in Portland, opposite coast, different world, fresh start. Eli cried when Miles told him. "But what about Vivian? What about us staying here?" "Sometimes plans change, buddy. Sometimes we need new adventures." "Did you break up?" 8 years old and already understanding too much. "Yeah, we broke up." "Because of the engagement thing?" Eli had apparently been reading news on his tablet. "That seems stupid. She should pick you. It's more complicated than that." "No, it's not." Eli's voice was fierce with childish certainty. "She should pick the person she loves. That's you. That's supposed to be you." Miles pulled his son into a hug and tried not to let him feel the way his hands were shaking. "Sometimes love isn't enough, buddy. Sometimes there are other things that matter more." "That's stupid," Eli said again, his voice muffled against Miles's shoulder. "Love should always matter most." Miles didn't have an answer for that, because Eli was right. And the world that had taught Miles otherwise was the same world that had just broken his heart with a press release and a strategic partnership. They left for Portland in 2 weeks. Miles packed their apartment with methodical efficiency, threw away anything that reminded him of expensive suits and galas, and the way Vivian looked when she smiled like she meant it. He didn't answer her calls, didn't read her texts, built a wall between them made of anger and hurt, and the absolute certainty that staying would destroy whatever was left of him. On their last night in the apartment, Eli found the blue tie, the one Vivian had chosen, the one Miles had worn to that first gala. "Are you bringing this?" Eli asked. Miles almost said no, almost threw it in the garbage with everything else he was leaving behind. Instead, he took it, folded it carefully, and packed it in the bottom of his suitcase where he wouldn't have to see it, but couldn't quite make himself discard it. Evidence of the best worst thing that had ever happened to him. Evidence that some contracts cost more than money. Evidence that he'd been stupid enough to fall in love with someone who saw him as a line item in a strategic plan. The moving truck left at dawn. Miles and Eli followed in their old car, the city disappearing in the rearview mirror along with everything they were leaving behind. Miles didn't look back. Looking back hurt too much. Portland was everything the city had promised. Rain-soaked streets, coffee shops on every corner, mountains visible on clear days that came less frequently than advertised. Miles found an apartment in a neighborhood with good schools and affordable rent, got Eli enrolled in 3rd grade at a place where nobody knew their story, and tried to build a life that didn't have Vivian-shaped holes in every corner. He failed spectacularly. The Hartwell position in Portland was decent. Operations management, better pay than executive support, normal hours that let him maintain the routines Eli needed. His coworkers were friendly, his boss was reasonable, and nobody asked questions about why he'd transferred cross-country with only 2 weeks' notice. Corporate bureaucracy had its advantages sometimes. Eli adjusted with the resilience of children, made friends quickly, joined the school science club, and only asked about Vivian twice in the first month. Miles learned to deflect those questions with practiced ease, learned to say, "It didn't work out," without his voice breaking, learned to pretend that moving 3,000 miles was about opportunity rather than running away. He almost believed it sometimes. But at night, Alone in an apartment that was quieter and emptier than the old one, Miles would pull out his phone and scroll through news about Hartwell Group, about the Westfield merger progressing, about Vivian Cross and Marcus Chen appearing at charity galas and business summits, the perfect power couple building their empire. He told himself he was torturing himself, told himself to delete the news alerts, block the business sites, move on like a rational adult. He didn't. Because somewhere in the methodical destruction of his feelings, Miles had left pieces behind, pieces that still hoped, still hurt, still wanted explanations that would never come. 3 weeks after they arrived in Portland, Eli came home from school with a permission slip for a father-son camping trip. "Can we go?" he asked, eyes bright with hope. "Marcus's dad is going, and he says there's fishing and campfires, and you can see like a million stars." Miles looked at the form, saw the date, a weekend in January, freezing and probably miserable. Saw his son's face and knew there was only one answer. "Yeah, buddy, we can go." Eli threw his arms around Miles's waist with the fierce enthusiasm of 8-year-olds who still believe their parents hung the moon. "This is going to be awesome. I'm going to catch the biggest fish." "I don't doubt it." But that night, after Eli was asleep, Miles sat on the couch with a beer he didn't really want and tried to remember the last time he'd gone camping. High school, probably. Before his parents died, before responsibility became his defining characteristic, before fatherhood rewrote every priority he'd ever had, before Vivian. He hated that everything divided into before and after her now. Hated that she'd become the marker by which he measured his life. The ghost that haunted even his attempts at moving forward. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, New York area code. Miles almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail and continued his evening of productive brooding. But something made him pick up. "Hello?" "Miles." Caroline White's voice was professional, warm, achingly familiar. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue. I got your number from HR. "Caroline?" Miles sat up straighter, suddenly alert. "Is something wrong? Is Vivian—" "Vivian is fine, physically." Caroline paused, the silence heavy with implication. "But I'm calling because someone needs to talk sense into her, and apparently I'm not qualified for that particular intervention. I'm in Portland. I can't help with whatever. The engagement is off." Miles went completely still. "What?" "Vivian called it off, 2 days ago, in the middle of a board meeting in front of Marcus Chen and both families. Told everyone she couldn't go through with a strategic marriage when her heart was elsewhere." Caroline's tone was carefully neutral. "The Westfield merger collapsed within hours. Stock dropped 8%. Richard Cross hasn't spoken to her since." Miles felt like he was hearing words in a language he didn't quite understand. "She called off the engagement. Spectacularly. There's video, if you want to hate yourself by watching it. She basically torched her professional reputation and her family relationships in under 3 minutes." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because she won't eat, won't sleep, and yesterday I found her crying in her office at 2 in the morning. Caroline's voice softened. "I've worked for Vivian for 4 years, Miles. I've never seen her cry. Not when her father screamed at her about quarterly losses. Not when the board tried to force her out last year. Never. Caroline, she loves you, you idiot. Actually, genuinely, catastrophically loves you. And she destroyed everything trying to prove it, and you're 3,000 miles away pretending none of this matters." Miles closed his eyes, feeling the world tilt again. She made her choice. She chose the engagement, the merger, the strategic future. She chose wrong. And then she chose you, even when it cost her everything. Caroline exhaled slowly. "I'm not telling you what to do, Miles. I'm just telling you the truth. What you do with it is your decision." She hung up before he could respond. Miles sat in the darkness of his new apartment, phone still pressed to his ear, trying to process information that felt impossible. Vivian had called off the engagement, had chosen him, publicly and catastrophically, after he'd already left. Had lost everything while he was in Portland building walls and pretending he'd moved on. He pulled up his laptop, found the video Caroline mentioned, watched Vivian stand in a boardroom full of powerful people and say words that ended her carefully constructed future. "I can't do this," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. I won't marry someone I don't love to save a merger, or satisfy family expectations, or maintain an image. I thought I could. I thought strategy mattered more than feeling. I was wrong. Marcus Chen's face in the video was resigned, almost sympathetic. Vivian, think about what you're saying. I have thought about it for weeks. I've thought about nothing else. She looked directly at the camera, at whoever was recording this disaster, and Miles saw exhaustion and determination and something that looked like desperate hope. I'm in love with someone else, someone who sees me as more than a strategic asset, and I let him leave because I was too afraid to choose him when it mattered. Richard Cross's voice, cold and furious. You're destroying everything we've built. No, Dad, I'm finally building something real. The video ended. Miles played it twice more, watching Vivian's face, hearing the crack in her voice when she mentioned letting someone leave, hearing himself in every word she didn't say. Eli found him still sitting there at midnight, laptop open, video paused on Vivian's determined expression. Dad, why are you up? Miles looked at his son, rumpled from sleep, too perceptive for his own good, standing in the doorway like a tiny anchor to reality. Can I ask you something, buddy? Okay. If someone you cared about made a really big mistake, but then they tried to fix it, really tried, even when it cost them everything, would you forgive them? Eli patted closer, squinting at the laptop screen. Is that Vivian? Yeah. Did she make a big mistake? A huge one. Eli climbed onto the couch beside him, studying the frozen image with serious consideration. Does she love you? I think so. Yeah. Do you love her? Miles had spent 3 weeks trying not to answer that question honestly. Spent 3 weeks pretending that distance and anger could kill feelings that had grown roots too deep to tear out cleanly. Yes, he said quietly. I love her. Then you should forgive her. Eli said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. Love is more important than mistakes. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't usually listen. Eli yawned, leaning against Miles's shoulder. Are we going back? To New York? To Vivian? Are we going back to her? Miles looked at his son, saw trust and hope, and the kind of uncomplicated faith that made childhood both beautiful and heartbreaking. I don't know, buddy. It's complicated. That's the thing adults say when they're scared. Eli's voice was matter-of-fact. But you're brave, Dad. You're the bravest person I know. Miles pulled Eli close, trying to figure out when his 8-year-old had become wiser than he was. Let's get you back to bed. We'll figure this out in the morning. But morning came with clarity that felt less like decision and more like inevitability. Miles couldn't go back. Not yet. Not until he understood what going back meant, what Vivian actually wanted versus what she thought she should want. Not until he knew that choosing her wouldn't mean becoming someone's mistake again. He texted Caroline, I need to talk to her, but not yet. Tell her I saw the video. Tell her I'm thinking. The response came immediately. She'll wait. But Miles, don't make her wait too long. She's barely holding on. The problem was that Miles didn't know what he was waiting for. Some sign, some proof, some guarantee that love would be enough this time when it hadn't been before. The answer came 3 days later in the form of a package delivered to his apartment with no return address. Inside was a small box wrapped in tissue paper, and beneath that, a USB drive and a handwritten letter. Miles recognized Vivian's handwriting immediately, precise, controlled, the penmanship of someone who'd learned cursive from expensive tutors and never quite unlearned the formality. The letter was short. Miles, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to come back or to believe anything I say. But you deserve the truth, and I've been a coward about giving it to you. The USB has a recording from my therapy session last week. My therapist suggested I write you a letter. I told her letters could be edited, could be calculated to produce specific responses. So she suggested I just talk. Unfiltered, unrehearsed, as honest as I'm capable of being. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that I see what I did, that I understand what I destroyed, that losing you was the consequence that finally made me understand what I'd been too afraid to admit. The box is something I should have given you months ago, Something I kept putting off because giving it to you would have meant admitting this was real. I'm sorry for everything. Vivian Miles opened the box first, found a key on a simple ring. No label, no explanation, just a key that looked like it belonged to a residential door. Then he plugged in the USB drive, put in his headphones, and pressed play. Vivian's voice filled his ears, shaky and raw in a way he'd never heard before. I don't know how to do this. I've spent my entire life controlling narratives, managing perceptions, making sure every word serves a strategic purpose. My therapist says that's why I'm alone, that I've optimized myself out of authentic human connection. A pause. The sound of crying quickly suppressed. I met Miles Carter because of a stupid photograph. Hired him because I needed a problem solved. Paid him because that's how I solve everything. With money, with contracts, with arrangements that protect me from actually having to be vulnerable. Another pause, longer this time. He was supposed to be temporary, manageable, a 6-month solution to a 6-month problem. But Miles, he's not manageable. He's genuine in a way I've never been. He parents his son with this fierce, protective love that makes me ache because I never had that. My father loved me strategically, conditionally, only when I performed correctly. The sound of tissue being pulled from a box. I fell in love with Miles sometime in the first month, probably earlier, probably the moment he stood up to my father and refused to apologize for who he was. I fell in love, and I panicked, because love wasn't in the contract. Love made everything complicated. Miles closed his eyes, listening to Vivian's voice crack and reform, break and continue. So I made another strategic decision. Engaged myself to Marcus Chen because he was safe, because marrying him wouldn't require vulnerability, because I could hide behind strategy and family pressure and all the reasons that made sense on paper. A long exhale, shaky and defeated. And I lost Miles. Lost the only person who ever looked at me and saw something worth loving beyond my last name in my bank account. I lost him because I was too much of a coward to choose him when it mattered. Silence then. The key in the box is to an apartment in Brooklyn, Park Slope, near the good schools. 3 bedrooms close to Eli's friends, walking distance to that community center he loved. I bought it 2 months ago, before everything fell apart. I was going to surprise you both for Christmas, tell you I wanted you to have a real home, tell you that the contract was ending, but we didn't have to. More crying, less controlled now. I thought I had more time. Thought I could fix the merger and keep you and somehow manage both. But the universe doesn't care about my timelines. I chose strategy over love, and I deserved exactly what I got. A pause, then her voice quieter, almost inaudible. I love you, Miles. I love Eli. I love the way you make me feel like I'm more than the sum of my accomplishments. I love that you call me on my bullshit, that you protect your son before everything else. That you somehow saw something in me worth loving even when I was paying you to pretend. The recording ended. Miles sat in stunned silence, headphones still on, tears running down his face unchecked. Vivian had bought them an apartment, had been planning a future while he was convinced she saw him as temporary, had loved him while he was busy assuming she was incapable of it. He played the recording again. And again. Listened to Vivian's voice break and reform. Listened to her be more honest than he'd ever heard her. Listened to the woman he loved admit she loved him back even when it cost her everything. Eli found him 2 hours later, still sitting with headphones on, tears dried but eyes red. Did you talk to Vivian? Sort of. She sent me something. What? Miles pulled out the key, held it up. An apartment in New York. Near your old school, near your friends. Eli's eyes went wide. She bought us an apartment? Apparently. That's the coolest thing ever. Eli grabbed the key, examining it like treasure. Can we go see it? Can we go back? Miles looked at his son, hopeful, excited, already mentally packing for an adventure he'd been ready for since the day they left. I need to talk to her first. Need to understand what this means. It means she loves us, Dad. What else is there to understand? Everything, Miles wanted to say. The logistics, the question of whether love was actually enough when you'd both already proven it could fail spectacularly. But looking at Eli's face, he remembered what it felt like to believe love was simple, to think that choosing each other was enough, that the rest would figure itself out. "You're right," Miles said finally. "It means she loves us." "So we're going back?" "Let me call her first, okay? Let me make sure this is real." Eli handed back the key with solemn ceremony. "Okay. But Dad, don't think too long this time." Miles called Vivian that night, after Eli was asleep, after he'd listened to the recording 6 more times and cried himself empty. She answered on the first ring. "Miles?" Just his name, said like a prayer. "I got your package." "I wasn't sure you'd open it." Her voice was rough, exhausted. "Caroline said you were thinking. I've been trying to give you space." "An apartment, Vivian?" "You bought us an apartment?" "I bought you a home. There's a difference." She paused. "I know it seems like another transaction, another way of using money to solve problems, but I swear it wasn't that. I wanted Eli to have stability. Wanted you to have something that was yours, not dependent on contracts or arrangements or my family's approval." "When were you going to tell me?" "Christmas. I was going to drive to Portland, show up at your door like some romantic comedy cliché, and tell you that I loved you, that the contract was irrelevant, that I wanted you to stay because you wanted to, not because I was paying you." Miles closed his eyes, imagining that scene, imagining what he would have said if Vivian had shown up before the engagement announcement, before everything fell apart. "But then the merger negotiations accelerated," Vivian continued, her voice tight. "And my father pushed for the engagement announcement, and I convinced myself I could have both. Could keep you happy while still satisfying everyone else. You can't have both, you have to choose. I know that now. I chose you, Miles. I chose you publicly, catastrophically, in front of everyone who told me it was the wrong choice." She laughed, bitter and broken. "I destroyed my relationship with my father. The board is talking about forcing me out. I've become exactly the kind of impulsive, emotional decision maker he always said I was." "And how does that feel?" "Terrifying, liberating, like jumping off a cliff and discovering you can fly, except you're also pretty sure you're actually just falling and the ground is coming up fast." Miles felt something loosen in his chest, the tight knot of anger and hurt that had been choking him for weeks. "The recording," he said quietly. "Your therapy session. That was brave. That was desperate. I didn't know how else to prove this was real." "It worked." Vivian went silent, then, carefully, "What does that mean?" "It means I believe you. It means I understand you were scared, that you made mistakes, that you're trying to fix them." Miles took a breath. "It means I love you too, even though I've spent 3 weeks trying not to." Miles, but Vivian, I can't be your backup plan. Can't be the thing you choose when strategy fails. If we do this, actually do this, I need to know it's because you want this life, not because you're running from the one you built." "I want you," Vivian said fiercely. "I want Eli. I want the life where I come home to arguments about homework and dinner that isn't catered, and someone who looks at me like I'm more than a portfolio to manage. I want messy and complicated and real. Even if it means losing Hartwell. I already lost everything that mattered when I lost you. Hartwell is just a company. It's your legacy. You're my future. There's a difference." Miles felt tears starting again, felt the careful walls he'd built beginning to crumble. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Scared this is temporary. Scared you'll wake up and realize you made another impulsive decision. Then be scared with me. We'll figure it out together." Vivian's voice was raw with hope. "Come home, Miles. Bring Eli. Let me prove this is real. Let me spend every day showing you that choosing you was the first actually intelligent decision I've made in years. I have a job here. Eli just started school. So we'll figure it out. Long distance for a while, or I'll move to Portland, or we'll find something in between. I don't care about logistics, Miles. I just care about you." "Vivian Cross doesn't care about logistics? Who are you, and what have you done with my calculating fake girlfriend?" She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "I'm your real girlfriend now, if you'll have me. Messy decision-making and public disasters included." Miles looked around his Portland apartment, temporary, sterile, full of furniture that didn't mean anything and walls that had never felt like home. Eli wants to see the apartment, he said finally. Yeah? The one in Brooklyn. He says it's the coolest thing ever that you bought us a house. It's not a house, it's Vivian. He's 8. Everything is either awesome or terrible. There's no in between. Miles smiled despite the tears. He also says you're cool, and I should forgive you because love is more important than mistakes. Your son is a genius. I know. Miles took a breath, made the choice that felt less like decision and more like inevitability. We'll come for Christmas. 2 weeks. We can talk, figure things out, see if this works in reality instead of just in theory. 2 weeks, Vivian repeated, and Miles could hear the smile in her voice. I can work with 2 weeks. No contracts this time, no arrangements, just us trying. Just us trying, she agreed. Miles? Yeah? Thank you for giving me another chance, for not being smart enough to stay away from my disaster. Well, Miles said softly, apparently I'm not very good at self-preservation when it comes to you. Lucky me. They talked for another hour, about nothing important, everything important, the space between fear and hope that felt like faith. When they finally hung up, Miles felt lighter than he had in weeks. He pulled out his laptop, booked flights to New York for December 23rd, and tried not to think about all the ways this could still fall apart. Tried to remember that love required risk, that safety was an illusion, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was try again even when you knew exactly how badly it could hurt. Eli was thrilled when Miles told him the next morning. We're going back for Christmas? To see Vivian and the apartment? Just for 2 weeks, to see how things go. They'll go great, Eli said with absolute confidence, because you love each other and love fixes everything. Miles didn't have the heart to explain that love didn't actually fix everything, that there would still be logistics and complications and the reality of building a life together after everything that had fallen apart. But watching Eli's face light up with joy, Miles thought maybe his son was right. Maybe love didn't fix everything, but maybe, just maybe, it was enough to start. The flight to New York felt longer than it was, stretched thin by anticipation and the particular anxiety that came from choosing hope over self-preservation. Eli pressed his face against the airplane window for most of the journey, narrating cloud formations and speculating about whether Vivian would meet them at the airport or if they'd take a taxi to the apartment. Or maybe she had a limo because rich people had limos, right? Miles let him chatter, grateful for the distraction from his own spiraling thoughts. What if 2 weeks wasn't enough? What if they'd built this reconciliation up into something impossible to achieve? What if Vivian had changed her mind, realized that loving someone came with complications she wasn't actually ready to handle? They landed at JFK at 3 in the afternoon on December 23rd. The airport chaos amplified by holiday travelers, and the particular frenzy of people trying to get somewhere that mattered. Miles collected their bags, held Eli's hand tight against the crowd, and tried to ignore the way his heart was attempting to beat straight through his ribs. Then he saw her. Vivian stood near baggage claim in jeans and a sweater that looked soft and expensive, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup, looking more nervous than Miles had ever seen her. She spotted them at the same moment, and her entire face transformed, relief and joy and something that looked like she might cry. Eli saw her half a second later and broke free from Miles's grip, running full speed across the terminal with the fearless enthusiasm of 8-year-olds who still believed in happy endings. Vivian! She dropped to her knees just in time to catch him, wrapping her arms around his small body with fierce tenderness. Hey, Eli, I missed you. I missed you too. Dad says we're staying for 2 whole weeks. Can we see the apartment? Does it have my own room? Can we get pizza tonight? Vivian laughed, the sound watery but genuine, and looked up at Miles over Eli's head. Their eyes met across 10 feet of airport terminal and 3 months of mistakes, and Miles felt something settle in his chest. Not certainty, not yet, but the beginning of belief. He crossed the distance slowly, luggage abandoned, until he was close enough to see the exhaustion in Vivian's face, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Hi, he said quietly. Hi. She stood, still holding Eli's hand, looking at Miles like she was afraid he might disappear if she blinked. How was the flight? Long, Good. Eli talked the entire time. I told her about the clouds that looked like dinosaurs, Eli announced proudly. I'm glad you're here, Vivian said, the words simple but weighted with everything they weren't saying in front of an 8-year-old in the middle of JFK. Miles reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that was familiar and terrifying in its intimacy. Me too. They got a taxi because Vivian insisted she was done with car services and drivers for a while, done with the trappings of wealth that created distance between her and actual life. Eli sat between them in the back seat, talking nonstop about Portland and school and his new friend Marcus, who had a turtle named Bob, and Miles and Vivian listened with the focused attention of people grateful for the buffer against their own intensity. The apartment in Park Slope was exactly what Vivian had described. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, windows that let in afternoon light, close enough to Eli's old school that he could walk there in 10 minutes. It was also completely unfurnished except for one room. Eli's room had a bed, a desk, bookshelves already filled with novels about space and adventure, a globe that lit up when you touched it, and posters of the solar system carefully hung on walls painted the exact shade of blue Eli had once mentioned liking. You remembered, Miles said quietly, standing in the doorway while Eli explored with delighted exclamations. I remember everything you tell me, Vivian said. That's kind of the problem. I can't forget you even when it would be strategically smarter to try. This is the coolest room ever, Eli announced, spinning the light-up globe with reverent care. Can I really stay here? It's yours, Vivian said. Whether you're here for 2 weeks or longer, it's yours. The weight of that promise hung in the air. No pressure, no expectations, just an offering of space and permanence in case they decided to take it. They ordered pizza because Eli insisted and because none of them had the energy for anything more complicated. Ate it sitting on the floor of the empty living room while Eli told Vivian everything she'd missed in 3 months with the detailed enthusiasm of someone who'd been storing up stories. Miles watched them together, Vivian asking follow-up questions, genuinely interested in third-grade drama and science fair projects, Eli blooming under her attention, and felt the last of his protective walls starting to crumble. After Eli fell asleep in his new room, exhausted from travel and excitement, Miles and Vivian finally had the conversation they'd been avoiding. They sat on the floor with their backs against the wall, shoulders touching, staring at the empty space that could become a home if they were brave enough to try. I talked to my father, Vivian said quietly. After I called off the engagement, he told me I'd destroyed everything he built, that I was selfish and impulsive and exactly the kind of emotional decision-maker he'd always feared I'd become. I'm sorry. Don't be. He was right. She glanced at Miles, something fragile in her expression. I am impulsive. I made an emotional decision, but it was also the first honest thing I've done in years. What did you say to him? That I'd rather be honest and broke than strategic and miserable. That he raised me to build empires but forgot to teach me how to build a life. Vivian's voice was steady, but Miles could hear the hurt underneath. He hung up on me. Haven't spoken since. Miles took her hand, threaded their fingers together. That's not fair to you. Life isn't fair. I learned that watching you raise Eli alone while I was born with every advantage and still managed to be lonely. She squeezed his hand. The board gave me an ultimatum. Step down voluntarily or face a vote of no confidence. Vivian, I stepped down 2 days ago, officially resigned as CEO of Hartwell Group. Miles turned to face her fully, shock cutting through everything else. You gave up the company? I gave up a job that was making me into someone I hated, someone who valued mergers over people, strategy over authenticity, success over actual happiness. Vivian's eyes were bright with unshed tears. My father built Hartwell. I was just maintaining his legacy. Maybe it's time I built something that's actually mine. What will you do? I don't know yet. Consulting, maybe. Investing in companies I actually believe in. Learning how to be a person instead of a portfolio. She smiled, shaky but real. Figured I'd start by trying to win back the man I love and his extremely perceptive 8-year-old. Miles felt his throat tighten. You don't have to win us back. You never lost us. I was just protecting yourself. Protecting Eli. I know. Vivian shifted closer, her free hand coming up to touch his face with devastating gentleness. I don't blame you for leaving, Miles. I blame myself for giving you a reason to. I shouldn't have run. Should have stayed, fought, demanded explanations instead of just assuming the worst. You assumed what I showed you. I was engaged to someone else while telling you I cared about you. That's not assumption, that's pattern recognition. They sat in silence for a moment, processing 3 months of hurt and misunderstanding, 3 months of loving each other from a distance because neither of them had known how to close the gap. Can I ask you something? Miles said finally. Anything. The contract, the original arrangement. When did it stop being fake for you? Vivian was quiet for a long time, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his hand. Probably the night of the first gala, when Gordon Wexler called us temporary and you defended me like I was something worth protecting. Nobody had ever done that before, stood up for me without calculating the cost first. She met his eyes. When did it stop being fake for you? Dinner with your father. When you told him about my background, my lack of education, like those things were just facts instead of failures. When you looked at me like I was enough exactly as I was. Miles swallowed hard. And when Eli met you and decided you were cool. He's never wrong about people. Smart kid. The smartest. Miles shifted, pulling Vivian closer until she was tucked against his side, her head on his shoulder. I'm still scared, you know. Scared this won't work. Scared you'll wake up and miss your old life. I'm terrified, Vivian admitted. I've never done this before. The whole vulnerable, honest relationship thing. I'm probably going to be terrible at it. I'll probably try to solve emotional problems with strategy and forget that feelings don't respond to logic. And I'll probably be insecure about money and status and whether I actually belong in your world. You don't belong in my world. You belong in our world, the one we build together, where nobody has to pretend to be someone they're not. Miles turned her face toward his, saw his own hope and fear reflected in her eyes. 2 weeks, he said quietly. Let's take it one day at a time. Figure out if this works when we're not performing for anyone else. 2 weeks, Vivian agreed, and then we decide together what comes next. He kissed her then, finally, after 3 months of absence and anger and missing her so badly it physically hurt. Kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning, like she was home and he'd been lost, like this was both an ending and a beginning, and he couldn't quite believe he got to have both. Vivian kissed him back with the same desperate tenderness, her hands fisting in his shirt, holding on like she was afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vivian laughed softly. I've wanted to do that since the day you ran out of my office with your tie crooked. I've wanted to do that since you fixed it and looked at me like I was someone worth noticing. You were always worth noticing. I was just too calculating to admit how much you mattered. They stayed on the floor until past midnight, talking about logistics and possibilities, about Miles's job in Portland and Vivian's uncertain future, about whether Eli would want to transfer back to his old school or if they should look at other options. Talked about therapy and communication and the work required to build something real after everything that had fallen apart. I started seeing a therapist, Vivian said, after you left. She's helping me figure out why I equate vulnerability with weakness. That's brave. It's necessary. I don't want to be the person who destroys good things because I'm too afraid to deserve them. She paused. Would you consider couples therapy? Eventually, if we decide to actually do this? Yeah, I would. Miles was surprised to realize he meant it. Eli's school counselor recommended therapy after his mom left. I couldn't afford it then, but I always thought it might help. Help both of us. We can afford it now. We can afford a lot of things now. Vivian's voice was careful. The money from the contract, you never cashed the last 4 checks. I want you to have it, Miles. Not as payment, not as obligation, as what it should have been from the beginning, security for you and Eli. Vivian, please. Let me do this one thing. Let me give you the safety I should have given without strings attached. Miles wanted to argue, wanted to refuse on principle, wanted to prove he didn't need her money, but he was learning that pride and fatherhood didn't always coexist peacefully, that sometimes accepting help was braver than refusing it. Okay, he said quietly. Thank you. They spent Christmas Eve turning the empty apartment into something that felt like a home. Bought furniture, a couch that Eli immediately claimed for fort building, a kitchen table where they could eat actual meals, beds for the remaining bedrooms. Vivian insisted on letting Eli pick decorations, which resulted in a somewhat chaotic mix of space-themed everything and the small artificial tree Eli declared was perfect for people who didn't have a lot of space for big trees. "We have plenty of space," Miles pointed out. "Yeah, but small trees are cozier," Eli said with irrefutable 8-year-old logic. They decorated the small tree together, the three of them, hanging ornaments that Vivian had apparently been collecting. A small rocket ship, a graduation cap with Eli 2033 engraved on it, a frame with space for a photo they hadn't taken yet. "You bought future ornaments?" Miles asked, holding up the graduation cap. "I was optimistic," Vivian said quietly. "Hoped I'd get to see him graduate someday." Eli hugged her suddenly, fiercely, with the unselfconscious affection of children who still believed in showing love without calculation. "You will. You'll be there for all my graduations, and my science fairs, and when I become an astronaut." Vivian hugged him back, her eyes meeting Miles's over Eli's head, and Miles saw everything they weren't saying, all the hope and fear and desperate wanting to believe this could actually work. Christmas morning came with snow falling outside the windows, and Eli bouncing on Miles's bed at 6:30 with the excitement of someone who'd been holding still for approximately 6 hours of sleep. "It's Christmas. Wake up. Did Santa find us in the new apartment? Do you think he knew we moved?" Miles stumbled into consciousness, found Vivian already awake in the doorway, wearing pajamas he'd never seen, and looking softer than he'd known she could look. "Pretty sure Santa has excellent tracking capabilities," she said, smiling at Eli. "Want to check?" Eli raced to the living room, found presents under the small tree, modest, thoughtful, the kind of gifts that suggested Vivian had actually paid attention to conversations instead of just throwing money at problems. Books about space exploration for Eli, a new tablet for schoolwork, a model rocket kit they could build together. For Miles, she'd gotten practical things: warm clothes for Portland winters, a leather messenger bag for work, noise-canceling headphones, and one small box wrapped in simple paper. Inside was a key on a ring that matched the apartment key. But this one had an engraved tag: "To new beginnings and honest endings. Choose me again every day. V." Miles looked up, found Vivian watching him with cautious hope. "It's a symbol," she said quietly. "You already have the apartment key. This one is just a promise. That I'm choosing you. That I'll keep choosing you, even when it's hard." Miles pulled her close, kissed her in front of the Christmas tree while Eli made exaggerated gagging noises, and tried to find words for the way his heart felt too big for his chest. "I choose you too," he said simply, "every day." The 2 weeks passed faster than Miles expected. They fell into routines: morning coffee while Eli slept in, walks through Prospect Park, cooking dinner together in a kitchen that slowly filled with the kind of clutter that made a place feel lived in. Vivian taught Eli how to make French toast. Miles taught Vivian that not everything required a recipe or a plan, and they all learned how to exist together without performance or pretense. They had hard conversations too. About Miles's job in Portland, about whether he should transfer back to New York or find something else entirely, about Vivian's next career move, about whether she wanted to stay in corporate world or try something completely different, about Eli's education, his therapy needs, the reality of blending their lives when they'd spent most of their relationship pretending. "I don't want you to give up your job for me," Vivian said one night after Eli was asleep. "That's not fair to you. And I don't want you to feel like you have to stay in New York because this is where we started," Miles countered. "Portland has opportunities too. Or we compromise. Find somewhere that works for both of us. Start completely fresh." They looked at each other, both recognizing the significance of that suggestion. Not your city or my city, but our city. A place they chose together, deliberately, with intention. "Boston," Miles said suddenly. "Caroline mentioned Hartwell has a satellite office there. It's between New York and Portland, has good schools, lower cost of living than here." "Boston," Vivian repeated, testing the word. "I don't know anyone there. No history, no expectations." "Exactly," Vivian smiled slowly. "Boston, our city, our fresh start. They told Eli over pancakes the next morning, watching his face carefully for signs of distress or resistance. "So we're not going back to Portland?" he asked. "Eventually we'll need to pack up the apartment, get your stuff," Miles said. "But we'd move to Boston. New school, new friends, new adventure." Eli considered this seriously. "Will Vivian come with us?" "If you want me to," Vivian said quietly. "Duh. Obviously I want you to. You're part of us now." Eli said it casually, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, then returned his attention to drowning his pancakes in syrup. Miles and Vivian shared a look over his head, amazed and grateful that an 8-year-old could make complicated things feel simple just by stating truth without fear. On New Year's Eve, they took Eli to watch fireworks over the Brooklyn Bridge, bundled in warm coats against the winter cold. Eli sat on Miles's shoulders for a better view, while Vivian stood pressed against Miles's side, her hand in his pocket, fingers interlaced. "This is the best New Year's ever," Eli announced as lights exploded across the sky. "Because we're all together." "Best New Year's ever," Vivian agreed, looking at Miles with an expression that made his breath catch. When midnight struck and the crowd erupted in cheers, Miles kissed Vivian while strangers celebrated around them, and Eli complained loudly about gross adult stuff. Kissed her like she was his resolution and his promise, his risk and his certainty, his perfectly imperfect choice. "Happy New Year," he murmured against her lips. "Happy beginning," she corrected, and Miles understood she wasn't just talking about the calendar. They moved to Boston in February, found a house near good schools with a backyard big enough for Eli's telescope, and a kitchen where they could cook together. Miles took a position managing operations for a nonprofit. Less money than corporate work, but more meaning, more flexibility, more alignment with who he actually wanted to be. Vivian started consulting for companies trying to build ethical business practices, used her strategic mind for causes she believed in instead of just profit margins. It wasn't perfect. They fought about communication styles and money habits and whose turn it was to handle school pickup. Vivian struggled with vulnerability, sometimes retreated into strategic thinking when feelings got too intense. Miles battled insecurity, sometimes convinced he didn't deserve this life or this woman or this happiness. But they fought fair, apologized genuinely, and kept choosing each other even when it was hard. Went to therapy together and separately, learned each other's damage and how to hold it with care. Built a life that looked nothing like either of them had imagined and everything like what they actually needed. Eli thrived. Made friends quickly, joined the science club, came home with stories about his day that he told to both Miles and Vivian with equal enthusiasm. Called Vivian by her name still, not Mom, but looked at her with affection that suggested the title mattered less than the relationship. 6 months after the move, on a Saturday morning that started with pancakes and ended with Eli's science fair, Miles stood in front of the bathroom mirror, attempting to tie his tie for the 5th time. "Need help?" Vivian appeared in the doorway, already dressed, watching him with amusement. "I can do it," Miles insisted, fumbling with the knot yet again. Vivian crossed the small space between them, her hands gently moving his aside. "I know you can, but maybe let me anyway." She fixed his tie with the same precision she'd had that first day in her office, efficient, practiced, intimate in its familiarity. But this time, when she finished and looked up at him, Miles didn't panic, didn't hold his breath like a man drowning. "Why are you breathing like that?" Vivian asked, echoing that first question with a smile playing at her lips. Miles pulled her closer, his hands settling on her waist, holding her like she was precious and permanent and exactly where she belonged. "Because I'm not afraid anymore," he said quietly. "Because you're here and Eli's happy and we built something real. Because I get to wake up next to you every morning and that still feels like a miracle." Vivian's eyes went bright with tears she didn't bother hiding anymore. "Miracles are just good things we didn't think we deserved." "Then I guess we both got lucky." "Dad, Vivian, we're going to be late," Eli's voice carried from downstairs, accompanied by the sound of him gathering science fair materials with chaotic enthusiasm. Vivian laughed, wiping her eyes. "Our son is calling." "Our son," Miles repeated, testing the words, loving the way they sounded. They made it to the science fair on time, watched Eli present his project on sustainable energy with the confidence of someone who knew he was supported and loved regardless of whether he won. He didn't win, came in third, which he declared was basically winning because medals are better than ribbons anyway. That night, after Eli was asleep and the house was quiet, Miles and Vivian sat on their back porch with wine and the comfortable silence of people who'd learned they didn't always need words. "I got a call from my father today," Vivian said eventually. Miles went still. "What did he say?" "That he heard I was consulting, that the companies I'm working with are doing well, that maybe I'd made the right choice after all, even if he didn't understand it at the time." She paused. "He asked if he could meet you. Actually meet you, not as some threat to be assessed, but as someone who matters to me." "What did you say?" "I said I'd ask you, that you get a say in whether you want my father in our lives." Miles thought about Richard Cross. Intimidating, calculating. The man who'd tested him and found him wanting. Thought about forgiveness and second chances and the fact that Vivian had given him both when he'd run away. "I'll meet him," he said finally. "For you, for us. Because holding grudges takes more energy than trying." Vivian kissed him, soft and grateful. "Thank you. Besides, Eli will probably charm him within 5 minutes. Kid has a gift for making difficult people reconsider their life choices." "Wonder where he gets that," Vivian said dryly, and Miles laughed because she was right. Eli had learned from the master, from watching his father navigate impossible situations with stubbornness disguised as hope. A year after they'd moved to Boston, on a regular Tuesday that felt like every other Tuesday, except for how completely extraordinary ordinary had become, Miles came home to find Eli and Vivian in the kitchen covered in flour. "We're making cookies," Eli announced unnecessarily, given the state of basically every surface. "I see that. Special occasion?" "Nope. Vivian said sometimes you make cookies just because Tuesdays need to be more interesting." Miles caught Vivian's eye, saw mischief and contentment, and the particular joy of someone who'd learned that interesting didn't have to mean dramatic. "Smart woman," he said. "She's the smartest," Eli agreed loyally, "except for sometimes she puts too much salt in things." "I put the exact amount the recipe called for. The recipe was wrong." While Miles watched them bicker affectionately about measurements and culinary expertise, watched his son laugh with flour on his nose and Vivian gesture emphatically with a wooden spoon, and felt gratitude so intense it was almost painful. This was what he'd been too afraid to hope for. Not perfection, not wealth, not status. Just this. A kitchen full of flour and laughter, a child who felt safe enough to be silly, a partner who'd chosen chaos over strategy and found out chaos felt like home. That night, after cookies were eaten and the kitchen was mostly clean, and Eli was asleep with frosting still on his pajamas, Vivian found Miles on the porch again. "You okay?" she asked, settling beside him. "Yeah, just thinking about how different things are now. Better or worse?" "So much better it scares me sometimes." Vivian took his hand, pressed a kiss to his knuckles. "Me too. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to prove this was too good to be real. And if it does, if things get hard again, then we handle it together, make new choices, adjust course, remember that we chose this on purpose." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere, Miles. You're stuck with me now." "Stuck implies I want to leave." "Do you?" "Not even a little bit. Not even on days when you're stubborn and infuriating and refuse to admit when you're wrong." "I'm never wrong," Vivian said with mock offense. "See? Infuriating." She laughed, the sound warm and unguarded, and Miles thought about how far they'd both come from that first morning when she'd fixed his tie and he'd fled like a criminal. Thought about contracts and engagements and all the ways they'd almost destroyed this before they'd even begun. Thought about second chances and third chances and the infinite patience required to build something that lasted. From inside, Eli called out, nightmare probably, or just wanting reassurance that his people were still there. Miles and Vivian went together, found Eli sitting up in bed looking small and worried. "Bad dream?" Vivian asked gently. "Yeah, I dreamed we had to move again, that this wasn't our real house." "This is our real house," Miles said firmly, sitting on the edge of the bed. This is our real life. We're not going anywhere. Promise? Vivian sat on the other side, the three of them forming a small circle of certainty in the darkness. Promise. This is home, Eli, for all of us. Eli nodded, reassured by words and presence and the particular safety of being loved by people who'd chosen to stay. Can you guys wait until I fall asleep? He asked, already drowsy again. Of course, Miles said. They stayed until his breathing evened out, until sleep claimed him again with the easy surrender of children who still believed the world was safe. Then they stood together in the doorway, watching their son sleep, and Miles felt Vivian's hand find his in the darkness. We did good, she whispered. We did so good, he agreed. And in the quiet house full of flour dust and cookie crumbs and small, ordinary miracles, two people who'd started as a transaction and become a family learned what it meant to choose love every single day. Not because it was easy, not because it was strategic, not because it made sense on paper or served anyone's interests except their own, but because it was real. And real, messy and complicated and perfectly imperfect, was worth everything they'd risked to find it.